Okay. Thank you so much, Kat, for coming on this podcast. And I'm so excited to chat with you and have a discussion with you. I was looking at your Instagram this morning, and I just love what you're doing. And I want to talk about that as well. But let's start with your journey, what your story, what do you want to share with the listeners about your story? And I know it's incredible and I can't wait to dive into it.
Thank you, Katrina. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm honored that you invited me to speak. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. So I think in talking about my journey, we do kind of have to start with some of those struggles and issues that bring you to a place of revelation and transformation, which is amazingly what you're focused on. And I love that idea. So I have two daughters. Right now they are 10 and 11. And they're, as with most moms, they're your world. They take up so much of your heart and your energy and your mind. And the first, I think, transformative experience and pivotal moment for me in my life was when their father and I split up. So the girls were 2 and 3, and
Wow.
they, through a series of kind of life events, I discovered infidelities, and I'm in a place now where we're at peace with it. But one of the things I learned was about myself and about how I wanted to show up. Was I was carrying a lot of these kind of societal, maybe cultural, familial expectations about how I had to show up in a relationship and what a marriage looked like. And I was struggling, like trying to make it work, insisting upon like dealing with kind of this negative treatment when this question finally popped in my head of not what should I do? Should I stay? Should I go? But what would I want my daughters to do in this situation? When I asked that question, light bulb chills moment where I got such clarity. It pointed out to me how hard it is to make that decision as an individual, because I was carrying, again, those cycles, those negative patterns that you pick up just from being around it, from what you see, what you grew up with. And by asking that little, that slightly different question, I was able to, walk away and understand that healthy for me and healthy for my daughters meant not staying in that particular relationship.
Wow, that is incredible. That, like, I got chills all over my legs hearing you ask that question, like, how do I want to show up? And then, like, what would I want my daughters to do? Because I think, what you touched on is like this idea of, these outside pressures that we have from family, from society, from whatever the case may be. And it's like you like took a line and you drew it in the sand. You said, like, I'm going to end this now. Like, I'm going to set a new standard for my family, for my daughters, and for their daughters and daughters. Like, that just gave me chills. It's like generational, these ideas that we have, like, you just like completely transform that. And that is so powerful.
Thank you.
And so hard. I mean, to do that, right. To break through that.
Yeah. And it was definitely an ongoing, ebb and flow, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And because I did it in that particular instance, there are so many things that I continue to learn as new situations come up. Like, just as a random example, that my daughters are in their teens, the sex talk and how it was done for me and how I want to do it differently for them. So asking that question, like, how do I want to show up differently and how do I want it to be different for my daughters, was really, really important. And that did inform, so kind of fast forward to now, my daughters and I continue to thrive. I now co-parent pretty effectively with their biological dad, but I did get remarried about 2 years ago. But about 6 months after we got married, my husband was had a recurrence of cancer that needed pretty quick surgery. And that surgery happened to happen 3 days before Illinois went on lockdown for the pandemic.
Oh
it was, everyone had tough times, so I'm not trying to, diminish or I think overinflate our experience, but on a personal level, it was a time when all of us felt like we can't take things for granted anymore. There's, especially my husband's health. He's a little bit older than I am, so it's not as if he has like a better prognosis, as good as it might be if he was younger and had cancer. So yeah, between the pandemic and his cancer and the recovery and the kind of struggles with that, we had to reassess kind of our family values and just look at the timeline of our lives and what we wanted to accomplish together, what we wanted to accomplish as individuals. And again, kind of ask ourselves, like, what's important? And so kind of at this age, we're now like 7 years past that time when I split up from my girl's father. The question kind of came back again, but less what would I want my daughters to do, but what do I want to model for my daughters? They're kind of tied together, as you noted. And we just decided to kind of make some big decisions around hitting pause on careers and focusing on making memories as a family. And that's what we're doing now. We're on this 9-month journey around the country in our car, in our SUV. We started in Chicago and we headed west to Seattle. We hugged the coast of California for a few weeks. And right now we're in Las Vegas with my parents, spending about a month here. And then we'll continue eastward from here through Texas, the south, and into Florida, and then back up the East Coast before heading back west to Chicago sometime during the summer, early summer.
That is so incredible. So, I mean, there's so much I want to ask because, going through this, like you mentioned, everyone was going through their own experience when lockdown happened. And then to add, this cancer reoccurrence with your husband and, on top of everything else, I want to ask, like, how did you get to that point where you were able to say, like, we need to make some big decisions. We're going to hit pause. I know, you're an attorney and, your husband, I'm not sure what he does, but I know you paused on your careers to take this time to travel. And I want to know, like, what was how did you get to that point where you were even able to make that decision? And then I also want to kind of talk about, like, what was the process of you even making that decision as well?
Sure. Yeah. Good question, especially because it wasn't like light bulb moment and then we're leaving in 2 weeks. So the pandemic gave us a lot of time to kind of think things through. Some things that had been set up prior to, I think, a lot of these life events that I think helped kind of maybe prime us for big moves, was having some sense of what our family values were. We have yet to actually sit down as a family and say, we value this, and write it down. But we definitely talk about it, and my husband and I certainly do. But these ideas of experiences over things and trying to model the openness, open-mindedness. Travel was a big thing for us, so that kind of ties into the new experiences. So in addition to things like equality and being fair and kindness, we also sort of knew as parents and as a family, like, certain things that we gravitated towards. So I just kind of plant that seed that having kind of a core set of commonalities and values between you and your kids and you and your partner can be helpful as a starting point. And then from there, I started a couple years ago doing gratitude journaling and setting out goals for myself and rewriting them on a fairly regular basis. So I wish it was daily, but it's probably more like 4 or 5 times a week. But I will write out, like, my goals. So just as a little bit of a reminder to align myself with those as I go about my day. Because sometimes, you know, in your head, maybe you want to paint again, but it can get lost in the shuffle of your day to day. But by forcing myself just to write down these kind of ways I wanted to show up, the person I wanted to be every day or every other day, I couldn't escape from it. So that for me has been a really helpful tactic. Some of the things on my like goals list were, I want to be an exceptional parent. I want to be an exceptional partner. I want to travel adventurously and model that for my daughters. You know, so having kind of this touch point on a regular basis, like a little bit of an infusion of this is what you want to happen, and knowing, I think it just sort of reframed my mind and opened it in a way to see opportunities when they would come up. So as you know, as we were kind of navigating the pandemic and thinking about like, how do we, knowing that we can't assume that 20 years or 15 years is going to look like what we want it to because of health reasons and whatnot. Some of those, I think, goals for myself started to come up in very like tangible ways. Like, okay, so what does it look like to travel adventurously and be an exceptional parent? So, you know, my husband and I had both always thought it would be really great to travel together. And I had actually seen a number of like travel videos or travel articles of families that were doing this. I don't know if it was like the YouTube algorithm feeding me stuff, but for some reason I started to see a lot of stories. And I do remember about 20 years ago, I had read an article in Parade magazine. I think it was one of the Sunday circulars. In the middle, you get like those little inserts.
Yeah.
And it was about this actress who was doing this, taking her family on the road in an RV for about a year. In her case, it was to help promote a book she had written. But I remember thinking like, how wonderful that her family gets to experience all of these things together and live together, not just in like 5 days of excitement or a week here, but actually kind of learning how to navigate each other and you know where each other's buttons are placed and how to get along in a very accelerated and kind of almost experimental way. Like you sort of like Big Brother, but on the road, because you can't escape each other as easily as you normally might. So yeah, it was something that came up during the pandemic relatively early. Is this one of the ways that we might be able to accomplish our goals in a way that aligns with our values? And as we, you know, continue to focus on saving and focus on kind of making some of our dreams happen, that became our goal for a good year plus, was how do we lay the groundwork where this can make sense and where it can allow us to optimize our time together.
That is so incredible. It's like I had this like clear, like this picture in my head of you like 20 years ago reading this magazine and seeing, you know, this lady you know, decide to like travel and do that for her book tour. And then it's like it almost planted a seed of like desire. Like, you know, part of what, you know, I teach when I talk about manifesting is that if there's a desire in our heart, like that means it's available to us, right? That means that it's something that is possible for us. And, you know, 20 years later, you're at a point in your life where you became open to that possibility, right? Like you had this dream that got planted, but then it took 20 years for you to be able to say, like, okay, now I'm in a place where I can do this. Like we can actually make this happen. And I love that. And I love how part of how you got to that point, it sounds like, is being intentional with your days, with your weeks. Like, what is it that I want to see in my life? What goals do I have for my life? What are my values? And like just being intentional with that. Because I think so often what happens is, as mothers and busy families, like we don't take the time to pause and really think like, what is it that we're working towards? Does this get us to our values? Does this help us get us closer to what it is that we want to actually see in our life? And so it's so beautiful to see how you and your husband, you know, were able to really bring that to your reality. through this intentionality and, the gratitude journal. Gratitude is just such a beautiful thing. So I would like to kind of, explore that a little bit more. Like how do you think you got to that point where you were able to like say, okay, like, because I'm sure fear came up, or what emotions came up for you? And then how were you able to kind of work through that? Because other, people listening to this might be like, hey, like I've always wanted to do something like that. Maybe not for a year, maybe for, a month or a summer or something like that. And it's like, how do you get through, what came up for you as like, this isn't possible? And then how did you kind of work through that so that you're actually doing it now?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. I think the hardest part was not really knowing initially anyone that had done this like we would be doing it. Like even on YouTube, if you're Googling anything in particular, I think there's some comfort in seeing people that come from your set of circumstances. So I would imagine, say, even if you're an entrepreneur, but if you come from an immigrant family where you have people relying on you to help support them, that it's hard to imagine entrepreneurship if no one in your circumstances has that same set of input. So I think for us, one of the big challenges was like, how is this possible? Because those people don't look like me, or I've never known anybody that did this with our particular set of circumstances. So part of that, I think, was, or part of the struggle around that was just maybe taking a little bit of a leap and understanding, like finding commonalities and feeling like, if they can do it, it's possible. Even if this isn't someone who has your job and their kids are younger or their kids are older, like what if? And I think that ties into a little bit of a question that I often ask myself when I'm taking bigger risks is, or when I feel like I'm taking big risks, because sometimes it's all in your head, but like, what's the worst that can realistically happen, and can I handle it? So in our case, like, okay, if I leave a job that's, steady and consistent, and I come back and, or we end the trip and I need to find a new job, or I need to start my own thing, can I handle that? And the answer was yes. Like, if you think about realistic, reasonable, worst case scenarios, and let yourself do that, which for some people may not work, but for us, it was what reassured us that we can do this. Like, we may not know we may not have a roadmap, but whatever anticipated outcomes, whatever the outcome is, we can handle it.
And so what internal resources did you like kind of hang your hat on? Like, you didn't know exactly what was going to happen, how it was going to work out, but like, what made you feel like I can say yes to this, even if this worst case scenario happens, quote unquote, right? Because like you said, so we can make the worst case scenario bigger and more difficult and more challenging in our mind. So like, what did you pull from the inside to say like, no, even if this happened and I had to come back and I had to, get another job or start something fresh, like we could make it happen. Like, how were you able to reach that decision?
So I have started since before the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic, definitely meditating. And when I do meditate, I tend to do the guided meditations that have affirmations and a sense of kind of being open to the abundance of the universe and everything happening and unfolding as it should. I think if you aren't rooted in that, it can be a lot harder to take risks, I would imagine, because that fear of failure is so much stronger. But when you come from a place of everything happens for a reason, every challenge is an opportunity to grow, and the universe has my back, then I think those internal anxieties start to calm down, at least for me. And that definitely made contemplating big moves, bold jumps, a lot easier. There's a quote that I think it was 50 Cent said once in an interview, but it always resonated with me. And it's, you can worry or you can have faith, but you can't have both.
Yes,
And I love that,
absolutely.
because if you really are a person of faith, and I happen to be raised and I still practice Catholicism, even though I pick and choose between, some of their beliefs. It's my family, it's part of their culture and tradition. So I choose to honor that and continue to be connected to that. But that's always been a big kind of underlying theme is, you pray and you leave things, you do what you can, but then kind of let it go, and have faith that things are going to work out. And I love that thought that worrying is actually contradictory to that, and in a way, living small is kind of contradictory to that. That you can, if there's a part of you that wants to live big, and you believe truly that the universe has your back, and God only wants what's best for you, then go for it, because that's just how it works.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, I'm thinking of, the listener who may be in the legal practice right now, or in some kind of career or profession, or starting a business, and maybe they're not regular meditators, or maybe they don't even meditate. And so I'm curious, like, how did you start this practice of meditating? And I love, what you talked about, how you use these guided meditations with affirmations that really allow you to kind of like open up to the abundance that's available to all of us, and how that was so instrumental in you making this really life, this big decision that you made in your life to go ahead and take a year and do this amazing thing, or 9 months, whatever it is, but to do this amazing thing and travel. Like, how did you start? Like, so for someone that's like, I can resonate with your story before, you made that decision, but once you made that decision, like, I'm kind of lost. Like, how do I get to that point where I can have that faith and really that belief that, yes, all things are happening for my highest good and things are working out? Like, how can someone start out with like meditating, and how did so I guess the way I would like you to try to answer that question is, what did you do? Like, I want to hear about your introduction to meditation and how you started to get into this practice of meditating.
Sure. So when I had already felt, and I think a lot of moms feel this way too, but I was definitely feeling kind of a little off balance, a little restless, and not totally sure where it was coming from. Like, so that was, probably since my daughters were 4 and 5 and 6 years old, just the combination of a stressful job and then taking care of them and asking myself, is this all there is? So that's kind of when I started to look into these personal development and growth oriented, maybe you could call them self-help books, but kind of information that could help me figure out, is it me? Is it my job? Is it the way I'm parenting? Is it my relationship? Like, what is it that I feel is a little bit like off, or like why do I still feel a little discontent? So I think for me, it was more of a desire to learn more about myself that led me to meditation. So many of the books I kept reading were acknowledging that mindfulness and taking even 5 minutes to breathe. When the Headspace app came out, that was a big deal. And so there were little things that kept pointing to, hey, maybe there's something to this. It's not this hokey thing anymore that, in the 80s or 90s or whenever I was a kid, like, it seems kind of like, woo, you're that woo-woo person that sits there and meditates. Now there's been this critical mass of information that shows this is really helpful. So I let myself like dabble with sitting still, different forms of meditation. And I just happen to find that the guided meditations work best for me, because my mind can race and wander if it's just quiet. And I start just thinking about to-do lists and, wondering what other people are doing and should I be attending to that. So for me, that's how I started tapping into kind of that guided affirmation type of meditation. And there's so many on YouTube. So the accessibility of it made it really easy. I will find, I found a few over time that really work for me. I like the sound of their voice. And I just started doing that every morning just before I got out of bed. And that's, I think listening, once I saw the benefits of how that framed my mind and how I could approach situations with a sense of calmness, I felt like I saw things with more clarity. A lot of the ones I listen to talk about gratitude and a sense of like your life being full already if you notice, and treating things as opportunities and reinforcing your resilience through challenges. So that really helped, I think, give me some clarity around like, where it was or what it was that I was hoping to accomplish. And it, instead of projecting or finding fault with my spouse and thinking like, you're annoying me and it's because you're doing something wrong. Realizing that there were some internal things that I could control or work with and reframe my perspective. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into the meditation thing. And then once the meditation started and I noticed how it made me feel on a regular basis, then I was also more open to trying out the gratitude list. And I think something that gave me, made it work for me was giving myself some compassion. Like I used to be one of those people where if you don't do it every day, you're a failure or it's not worth it. And now I've come to realize like life does get in the way. So show yourself some grace and do it as much as you can to where it still feels beneficial. And if at some point it's starting to cause you guilt or you can't do it because your kids need you or your schedule is just so tough, weighing that out. So doing what works for me has also helped me navigate some of these, tough times.
Yeah, totally. I can relate to that with the meditating because I also love doing guided meditations. My mind is the same. Like if I try to just sit there and quiet my mind, it can be a struggle. And so listening to a guided meditation has really helped me to fall in love with meditating and see the ability that we have to, like for example, I think it was yesterday morning, I woke up and I had like 3 thoughts pop into my head of like, let's worry about this. What are you going to do about that? And I don't normally wake up with those thoughts flooding my mind anymore. And I was like, okay, I see there's 3 thoughts that are already in my head. And I just woke up. And so I did a meditation. It was like, a 15-20 minute guided meditation. And when I was done, it's like those thoughts were gone. Like they completely left. And it was like I was a different person after that because my energy had changed. I went from like worry and like, what am I going to do to like, there are so many possibilities. Like my energy was high and it was just like such a transformation that can take place in just a few minutes every day in the morning. And I love how you talk about, giving ourselves grace because, right now, being pregnant and my kids like wanting to sleep in the bed with us. There are mornings where my son wakes up and I'm like, I've got my headphones in, I'm doing my meditation. And he's like, no, you're not finishing it. Like, it's time to wake up, and I'll be like, give me 5 minutes. I'm doing my meditation. And like, sometimes he'll let me and he'll say, can I listen with you? But sometimes, my son's 3 years old and he tends to wake up first out of my 2 children. And sometimes he'll be like, nope, I don't want to listen. Like, we're done. Like, you're done. And it's like, having grace and, and being able to, even in those moments, like remembering, like, who is it? Like, why do I do the meditation in the first place? Who is it that I am becoming when I do these meditations? And really tapping into that without, sitting for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long the meditation is, and just like kind of accessing it right there, because there is some like muscle memory there, right? When we're doing this meditation every day, we're, rewiring our brains and we're installing that new identity, that new belief system into us. And so even on days where we can't do a full meditation, we can still access that because it's still there. And I think, having that grace of like, it's okay. Like, I'm doing my best. And that's enough, right? As long as we're we're being as consistent as we can be when we can. And when we can't, it's like having the grace. I love that.
Yes. And I love hearing about you talk about meditating in front of your son, because one of the things that I've been, leaning into more and more is reminding myself that showing up for myself is also showing up for them. So there's that dual benefit of you feel better, you feel good as an individual, but you can also navigate any stressful situations. You're more patient with your kids, with your coworkers. And then when it comes to kids, you're normalizing that for them. Like they will also now feel like it's normal to ask for 5 more minutes of downtime or 5 more minutes to meditate when they're adults or teens or, just further along in life, which is amazing. Like I never had that. So if I had a mom who meditated or a dad who meditated, who knows? Like it may not have been as big of a hurdle, or I may not have waited till my 30s or 40s to start meditating, So it's wonderful to hear that story, that anecdote.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful to be able to pass along these, different techniques that we can use to manage, the stress and the overwhelm and the things of life. And not only that, but what you tapped into is like getting that clarity, getting that vision of like what it is that you actually want to see in your life, and having the faith and the ability to step into it. It's like, there's so much evidence and studies about the benefits of meditating on our like physiology and, helping us to manage stress and to manage those feelings of overwhelm. But to then take it to that next step of where not only are you just like getting out of survival mode, but you're also able to like start creating and having that clarity and creating something beautiful in your life that maybe you didn't even realize was possible before, because you were like so stuck in that kind of stress mode. So it's so beautiful to see how even just the progression of meditation, how it progresses through us as, meditators over time.
Yes. Yeah. You had touched on this earlier, but there's a kind of a wonderful synchronicity, I think, between, in my case, what meditation did for me as an individual, and then also kind of that intentionality, that goal setting, and how they end up working together. If you are from this headspace of calm and confidence and a sense of possibility and wonder, and then you have these goals that you're reminding yourself of, suddenly there's like an energy and an electricity of it's not scary anymore, or it's less scary. And maybe I can do that. Yeah. So I think it's
beautiful.
Just wanted to harken back to that.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to read a quote that I found from your Instagram today, because it was from a while ago, but it kind of it touches on what we've been talking about, which is so beautiful, that synchronicity. But you wrote, "A mother's words become her daughter's thoughts. So speak kindly to her and yourself." I just wanted to mention that. I read that and I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. I think it ties into what we've been talking about having compassion for ourselves, about being that example for our children, and just really being mindful of how our words do become what our children are thinking. So thank you so much for that quote. And where I would love to tell our audience where they can find you, and anything else that you want to share before we kind of wrap up today's interview.
Good. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, that quote, that is on my Instagram account for my podcast. So I do have a podcast called Know Them, Be Them, Raise Them. It's aimed at moms of tween and teen girls who are mindful and growth oriented, just trying to pull in experts or stories from moms who've been there, or coaches and therapists who can give us insights into how we can show up better for ourselves and our daughters. And if you want to follow the Instagram account for that, it is at Know Be Raise Them on Instagram. I also have a Facebook page, so facebook.com/Know Be Raise Them. Yeah, I would love to have you check it out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Kat. It was such a nice, it was a pleasure to be able to talk with you and hear
This is
about
so
a little bit
fun.
about your journey. And I loved how we got to touch on meditation and having that intentionality. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really wonderful. And I wish all the best to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Okay.